Governor, it's really an honor to be on a panel with you because when we were in Boston, we looked to what Denver did in the early 70s as an example for U.S. cities and citizens in U.S. cities really standing up to the IOC. So it's great to be with you today, and we're fortunate, and Colorado is fortunate to still have you here talking about these same issues. So I'm Chris Dempsey, I'm from Boston, and I want to be very clear that it is not for a Bostonian to tell you whether the games are right for Denver. That is up for Denver to decide and not for me to decide. But I do want to share what happened in Boston, what we learned, what we saw, and then the similarities that I'm seeing in Denver compared with what we saw in Boston. So thank you for the invitation to be here today. It really is an honor to be with you and to have an opportunity to share Boston's story a little bit. Some of these similarities between Boston and Denver. We've got the last two AFC Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. We both hosted Democratic national conventions that featured Barack Obama. 2004 when he made his big speech in Boston, and of course 2008 here in Denver where he really took over from there. I mean, what an amazing event that was. We're also both known for our oysters. Ours come from Massachusetts Bay. Yours are the Rocky Mountain variety, and I'm not going to have a debate today about which is better. But I will try those tonight if someone puts them in front of me. I haven't had them before. And we also have a history of thinking about Olympic bids, weighing the pros and cons, and understanding that they're not right for our communities. This was Denver in the early 70s. This is Boston in 2014. These are the three gentlemen that at one point were leading the Boston 2024 bid. Very smart, capable, accomplished, generous men. John Fish on the left, who was the bid's chair, he is consistently rated as the single most powerful person in Boston by Boston Magazine. He's also the owner of the largest construction company in Massachusetts. In the middle, a man who needs no introduction, Governor Romney, someone that we're all very familiar with. And on the right, Steve Pagliuca, one of Governor Romney's colleagues from Bain Capital. He now owns the Boston Celtics. But it wasn't just sort of rich old white men. It was also people like Meb Keflezighi, who won the Boston Marathon and is an Olympian for the United States. David Ortiz, one of my heroes, a man who brought us our first World Series championship in 86 years. And Larry Bird, of course, the Boston Celtic player who was also an Olympian. And I was 10 years old when the Dream Team was playing in Barcelona, right? So people that were very, very popular in Boston. And I think you're seeing some of the same dynamic in Denver with sports heroes being appointed to the exploratory committee. And the boosters really produced a captivating bid. Here's downtown Boston with our gleaming skyline in the background, the Charles River on the left, the Boston Harbor on the right, this beautiful new stadium with fireworks going off. I mean, what a stirring view. Here is Boston Common, the oldest public park in the entire United States, with the beach volleyball facility, again, that gleaming skyline in the background, the golden dome of our State House, the beautiful park and the public gardens, and the river in the background. I mean, this is really captivating stuff. But what Bostonians realize is the same thing that the IOC actually knows, which is that bid books are the greatest fiction ever written. Bid books are about selling you an idea, about hopes and dreams and promises, and they meet very hard realities when they are exposed to the light of day and when the public is able to dig in on the details. And that's exactly what happened in Boston. Bostonians were supportive of the bid as the bid was being talked about, and when the USOC chose Boston over DC, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Support was in the high 50s, even in the 60s, and opposition was down in the 30s. So Bostonians were very open to the world coming to Boston. We welcome the world every September when students come to Harvard and MIT and Northeastern and Boston University and Suffolk and Emerson and the long list of schools that we have. So we're a very open city. But as we learned more about the bid, Bostonians liked it a lot less. So we dispelled some myths, and I'm going to dispel those same myths for you today. The first is that the Olympics are going to fix your city's infrastructure. The reality is the IOC does not contribute a dime to your infrastructure. And in fact, to make matters worse, they actually require that lanes on your major highways and streets in your city be dedicated just for their use during the Olympics. So you have to have a special Olympic pass. You can be an IOC member or a sponsor or an Olympic athlete, but if you're a regular citizen, you are not driving in those lanes. The second myth is that the Olympics will be an economic boon for your city. There is no evidence whatsoever that the Olympics leaves your city better off from an economics perspective. And that's even true often in the short term, because what happens in the short term is that the Olympics scare off the usual tourist and business activity that would happen in your city. Most businesses, when the city hosts the Olympics, shut down and just tell their workers not to come to work for 3 weeks. The third is that the Olympics are going to somehow inspire people to participate in sport, and a new generation of Coloradan athletes and children are going to become these great athletes now. There's no evidence that that's the case. In the UK, they've actually seen sport participation numbers drop since they hosted the Olympics in 2012. The other myth here is that the Olympics, when they're in the United States, are profitable. It's just those other countries that do the Olympics wrong, but the US does the Olympics right. We can debunk every single one of those recent Olympics, starting with Lake Placid in 1980, where the city of Lake Placid required a bailout from the state taxpayers of New York to stave off bankruptcy. All you have to do is Google that. Google New York Times, Lake Placid 1981 deficit, and that article will come up. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these other bids in later slides. The next myth is that some games actually can be well managed, that you only hear about the Sochis and the Beijings, and that other bids really work out pretty well. The University of Oxford studied this. They found that 100% of the games since 1960 have gone over budget. They found that it was the riskiest type of mega project that a region could undertake. Riskier than a nuclear power plant, riskier than building a hydroelectric dam, riskier than building a subway tunnel. Incredibly risky projects. The next is that the IOC has somehow changed and that they're different now. And you heard Rob talk about Agenda 2020. I am not sure where he's getting his numbers. I've read that document 5 or 6 times. It is not 20 items in the list of 40. It's exactly 7 items. And I'm happy to go through the list with him and we can compare notes on this. One of the items to talk about cost savings is that instead of having to physically deliver copies of your bid to the IOC headquarters in Switzerland, you can now email it in. That's a savings of maybe a couple $100 on FedEx, on a bid process that easily goes above $50 million when all is said and done. The next is that the IOC has the best interest of cities at heart. They really want to do what's right for the host city. They talk about this as a competition, that the best city is going to win. In fact, the reality is that they are hosting an auction, and they want as many bidders in that room as possible. That's why they call it a bid. And as they get those bidders in the room, they are going to bid up that price so that it's in the interests of the IOC, not in the interests of the host city. Part of what Denver is being used as now is a talking point so that the IOC can say Denver's interested, Calgary's interested, Innsbruck is interested. They want to get that activity going so that those cities show up in the auction room and they get sucked into that auction process and they overbid. Here's what happened in the 2022 Winter Olympics bidding cycle. You had all these cities that were in the auction room, and then the ones on the right wisened up and realized that they were in an auction, not in a competition, and that this was not a good idea for them. So Stockholm, Oslo, Krakow, Munich, Davos, and Lviv, for one reason or another, including a couple referendums, including city council votes, all dropped out, leaving just Beijing, China, and almighty Kazakhstan to stay in the race. What's the common denominator between these? The two on the left are dictatorships with no democracy. Every single country on the right is a democracy. Okay? So when democracies engage in these Olympic processes, they realize that they are getting a really raw deal, and they say this is not in our interest. The eighth is that there's going to be some sort of insurance package that is going to cover taxpayers from cost overruns. Don't worry about the fact that we might have budget overruns and bigger costs than we expected. Insurance is going to pick that up. It's exactly what Boston 2024 said. It's exactly what Chicago 2016 said. This myth was debunked by a Boston College professor who called it smoke and mirrors. A senior insurance executive said that it does not exist. In Chicago 2016's case, the leader of that bidding process was the founder of Aon Insurance, one of the largest insurance companies in the entire country, in the entire world, and even he was not able to create an insurance package that covered Chicago taxpayers from the risk. And I'd be glad to engage more on this question of insurance later on and whether there is such a thing as cost overrun insurance. It does not exist, folks. The ninth is that there's going to be some clear distinction between the public budgets and the private budgets. In fact, what's happening here is a shell game, and we'll get into this in more detail as we talk about the conversation, but there's really four budgets that you're talking about with the Olympics. There's the operating budget, which is the one on the far left here. Oh, is it advancing automatically now? There we go. Then you've got the non-OCOG permanent venues. Then you've got public capital expenditures, and then you've got security costs. The two on the right are pure public dollars. Number two is kind of a mix between public and private. Number one, they say, is private, but it's backed up by a taxpayer guarantee. So if there are cost overruns in bucket one, the taxpayer picks them up. And the other thing that happens here is that costs that were originally in the private operating budget get shifted over to the other budgets. That happened in Boston. The first budget they showed us, there was a $300 million line item for transportation in the operating budget. The next version of the budget 6 months later, that $300 million line item had just been moved into security. And they said, well, you know, that we're going to be transporting important people and VIPs, and those people need to be secure, so it's totally appropriate for federal taxpayers to pick that up. That's the game that gets played with these budgets. And then finally, and this is most important, it is a complete myth that the IOC is going to accept anything other than a taxpayer guarantee. They talked about the $950 million that the IOC hands you. That is one of the checks that does trade hands. It's true. We'll give the IOC some credit for that. The other check is the check that you all write back to the IOC, and that is a blank check. And it says that Colorado and Denver taxpayers are going to pick up the bill if there are cost overruns. We talked with Boston 2024 about this issue at length, and they admitted to us the IOC would never go for a city or for a deal that did not have the taxpayer guarantee. In Chicago 2016, Mayor Daley, for months, told his citizens at home, I'm not going to sign the guarantee. When he actually went to sign the final bid document in Switzerland, the IOC said, this is your last chance, you need to do this or your bid is not going to be valid. And he signed the document, flew home sheepishly, and admitted to his voters that despite months of promises of not signing that document, he signed it because it was the only thing that the IOC was going to accept. Let me hand it over to Kyle for 1 minute on, or 2 minutes, whatever's remaining, to share his thoughts, and I look forward to more conversation with you, but thank you so much for having me.